Good afternoon. It was a pleasure spending this week with all of you. I think our two classes this week went very well. Um, it's only a shame that we don't have another hour in each of the sessions to go over more of the reading. If any of you, of course, want to talk about more of the literature, which I hope we'll spend more time with in the coming weeks, I do encourage you to come to office hours or to start a correspondence with me via email, and I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to do that. Since we do have some new people joining the class this week, I thought I might devote this series of video lectures to a review of the class, a review of the class insofar as I might go over the syllabus bit by bit, and then also give what we might call a kind of diagrammatic overview of the kinds of things you should be learning in this class. This week I've really put some emphasis on the notion of problematizing, of creating problems, and of linking those problems to the terms that Bennett and Royal write about. So, in other words, what their chapters are about. So, trying to link the notion of problematizing to beginnings, to readers and reading, to the author, to the text and the world, and also what we talked about this morning, the uncanny. And so what I'd like to do is kind of give another overview of what all that's about, try to streamline the modes of criticism we've spoken about, and articulate the relationship between those modes of criticism and the chapter titles and the work of problematizing, which I do want you to learn. And then, if that weren't enough, also try to bring in another issue, which are important terms. Okay, so the four things: the activity of problematizing, the chapter titles, the terms that Bennett and Royal are problematizing for us in their chapters, and problematizing by working directly with select works of literature. The modes of criticism, many of which think about those terms that Bennett and Royal are writing about. So, for instance, new criticism thinks about beginnings, as does post-structuralism, as does reader response criticism, as does so many other modes of criticism. Okay, and also, if that weren't enough, also the terms. So, for instance, intentional fallacy, right? An important term that I do want you to know that the book defines several times. That should probably already be in your notebook, even if we didn't talk about it a great deal in class. And you should know what modes of criticism the intentional fallacy falls under as a term, and also what sort of chapter terms we can relate it to. It's certainly relevant when talking about beginnings, and it's certainly relevant when talking about the author too. Okay. So those will be later videos. In this video, if I thought I might read through the course description of the syllabus one more time. In fact, I'm not sure I ever did do that since I let you go so early on the first day last week. So I want to do that now and try to articulate any any difficulties that you might have with the course description and the course goals. All that's on the first page. And I would also like to explain a bit more about the grade distribution and the descriptions of the assignments according to which I will be evaluating your final grade. Okay. So without further ado, the course description. English 201 Principles of Literary Study. English 201 usually marches students through a series of isms. One barely gets a sense of new criticism before rushing on to Russian formalism, structuralism, post-structuralism, reader response criticism, feminism, Marxism, new historicism, post-colonialism, and eco-criticism, not to mention, of course, psychoanalysis, queer studies, and race studies. So most courses like this one are lined up linearly in this way, right? So that each week you take on one of these modes of criticism. As you've already noticed, that's not how I'm organizing this class. Okay. Why? I have come to have my doubts about this approach to the study of literature, for it tends to misrepresent these isms either as fully defined methods, which they aren't, or as internally consistent schools of thought with battle lines drawn between them, which is also untrue. One often encounters the unfortunate effect of this misrepresentation in the snide attitudes of students or scholars toward the new critics, who don't seem all that new anymore, or in the dismissive designation of deconstruction, a branch of post-structuralism, as a fad that is now out of fashion. These reactive judgments, which are as misleading as jeremiads against the political pollution of literary studies, political pollution by, for instance, Marxists or feminists, are precisely the kinds of thinking that I want us to get away from in this class. After all, one need not spend much time in scholarly journals or on the third floor of URI's Kingston Library to discover that it is difficult to identify any critic with only one of the purported methods or schools I listed just a few minutes ago, or that the battle lines. Let me reread that sentence. I might have just discovered a typo. After all, I write, one need not spend much time in scholarly journals or on the third floor of URI's library to discover that it is difficult to identify any critic with only one of the purported methods or schools I list above, or to discover that the battle lines so often presented in textbooks are actually porous, meaning critics cross the battle lines pretty frequently, and I would encourage us to cross them too. Is Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, for instance, a post-structuralist because she is a translator of French philosopher Jacques Derrida, who we watched a video of on our second day of class? Or is she best understood as a feminist, or a post-colonialist, or a formalist, or a queer critic? She, depending what essay you're reading, she can be one or all of these. In an effort to avoid marching through a series of isms in a way that obfuscates literary studies and discourages interest in all aspects of studying literature, criticism, and theory, I'm going to pause mid-sentence like I always do. In short, I want all of the modes of criticism that I list at the top of this course description to be interesting to you, right? I don't want you to approach all these modes of criticism as if they're just like menu items on a buffet table, right? And that you can just sort of arbitrarily pick one and leave one behind. That really every single mode of interpreting literature or doing literary criticism draws something from the other modes of criticism too, and really what is most important is that work of problematizing, is that work of creating for yourself questions. And then once you've developed your questions, fine-tuning your approach to answering those questions by maybe borrowing from ideas or concepts or terms that fall under those various modes of criticism. Okay, and as the class moves forward, we'll talk more about that. Anyway, in order to avoid the march I just described, we will approach the study of literature by unpacking several concepts. We've done it already: beginning, the author, readers, and reading. Unpacking several concepts, problems, and ideas that many of the critics and theorists associated with these isms share. This means that we will be, with the guidance of Bennett and Royal's textbook, studying the study of literature as cross-hatching clusters of concerns, concepts, theories, frameworks, perspectives, limitations, and attitudes. In this course, you will, number one, so these are the course goals. That was the course description, now the goals. Develop a familiarity with various approaches to literary study and their relationships with one another. 2, develop your close reading skills, which you should be doing on your own as you're reading the romantic poems, and not just wait for that sort of improvement to happen in class. Number 3, develop a habit of reading widely as a means to cultivate your taste. I really do expect you to be reading poems other than the ones I'm assigning, right? I want you to be walking around carrying that romantic poetry volume and reading as many of them as you have time to read. Number 4, you will develop your capacity to problematize, there it is, ideas, and to unpack the component parts and implications of concepts. 5, use and master the functions and features of the library's research databases, which I'll be showing you in the coming weeks. 6, synthesize the research of others in both critical and gracious ways, in a critical and gracious way. 7, discuss literature, theory, and criticism with others. 8, and plan, outline, and compose an extended work, study of a work of literature. So that's a lot, right? That's a lot. And that's why I think on the first day of class, and maybe even in my first video, I can't remember. Maybe it's just something I was saying to myself. This class is something of a juggernaut, right? Because it used to be a 2-course sequence, 201, 202, and now just as a 1 course. Really, we're trying to do probably too much, too much within 1 course. And yet, I think it's important to give it the old, no pun intended, college try. Okay. On the second page, one of you asked me after class, a new student to the class asked me where to look to see what books he should get for the class. That's at the top of page 2. We are reading, I have 2 of them close at hand here. This is our textbook, The Bennett and Royal, An Introduction to Literature, Criticism, and Theory. I think it's the best textbook on criticism and theory that exists. And also our first literary text that we'll be using in conjunction with this book is Jonathan Jessica Wordsworth's edited The Penguin Book of Romantic Poetry. This is 1,000 pages long, so it's serious. We're not going to even come close to reading all the poems in here, but we will be sampling from, I think, from every single section in that anthology. So okay, so that's what you'll need. You'll also need a short book of poetry by Gertrude Schneckenberg called Heavenly Questions, and also Alan Hollinghurst's brilliant novel, The Line of Beauty. These are all brilliant books, but that in particular is one that's dear to my heart. Okay, so grade distribution and descriptions. 20% of your grade goes toward what I call your engagement. Most professors might call this participation, okay? I will evaluate your engagement based on your class attendance as well as your attention during class and your preparation for class. If I feel that you are not prepared, and note that I do pay attention to these things even if I don't point them out in class, if I notice that you're not prepared, your engagement grade will not, you won't get full credit, right, for engagement by the end of the semester. Note that when I do say that I want you to be prepared for class, that means actually quite a bit. It doesn't mean that I just want you to do the reading. It means I want you to do the reading, I want you to take notes, I want you to record questions, I want you to reread parts that interested you. I do that for every class, and I expect you to do it too, okay? Anyway, you certainly probably can't reread everything, but reread the parts that interest you and come to class ready to share those parts, okay? I would love nothing more than for one of you to begin class by asking a question, right? Asking a question about what on earth is going on in this poem or even in our textbook. If we stumble upon a moment where it's really confusing, what Bennett and Royal are attempting to do, we can figure it out together. Okay, so that's 20% of your grade. 10% will go toward quizzes and other homework. Other homework is just sort of like a vague term that may refer to some take-home homework that I may assign depending whether or not I feel that you all are prepared to talk about these texts in class. You will be having a quiz on Tuesday. I said that in an announcement on Sakai. Note that most quizzes will be closed book, but you may refer to your handwritten notes. I may also allow you, depending what the content of the quiz is, I may also allow you to use your literary texts. You will not be allowed to use your Bennett and Royal textbook for the quizzes. There will be a midterm and a final exam. These are written in-class examinations. The midterm will stretch over 2 days, October 21st and October 23rd. That is the 8th week of the semester. Okay. The final exam runs from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. on, I know, it's awful, right? on Thursday, December 11th. Okay. if Sorry, excuse me. If you do have more questions about that, just let me know. I will certainly be giving you some tips for how to study for these exams in the near future. Suffice it to say that if you're doing all the reading, if you are taking good notes, if you are paying attention to the terms that seem most important to Bennett and Royal, you shouldn't have much trouble. They will be somewhat open book. They will certainly be open literature book and certainly open notes. Okay, maybe not open textbook. You must also write a research paper. That is not due at the end of the semester. It is due on November 25th. Okay, and you will submit, I'm just going to read the paragraph in the syllabus. You will submit a research study of a literary work. By researched, I mean that the study should account for pertinent or interesting historical or biographical context, the critical reception of the literary work or its author, as well as any theoretical terms that are useful to the argument of your study. The paper itself should be 7 to 8 pages in length and should follow the 2009 edition of the MLA Handbook. I encourage you to begin this paper ASAP, especially once you stumble across a poem or a problem that interests you. And certainly you may write about the novel. Like if we start reading Hollinghurst and you'd rather write about that novel, you certainly can. You may meet with me at any point in the semester to begin brainstorming ideas for your paper or talking through anxieties you might have about the paper. And I also encourage you to share your work in progress with me on Google Docs. And I indicate which email address you should use for that if you decide to do that. If you share a document with me on Google Docs, I can give you feedback at any stage of the process. Okay, but I certainly understand if that makes you feel uncomfortable, because as you know, I could log into Google Docs and just sort of watch your progress day to day, and maybe you don't want that. But anyway. Okay, so that's the first video. This went a little longer than I wanted it to. I'm going to say that probably after every video. But when we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Bennett and Royal book, and also after that, try to talk a bit more in detail about the modes of criticism that are sort of scattered across our chapters, and the modes of criticism that normally organize a class like this. And then maybe I'll even get into the literature a little bit just to help illustrate some of the important terms we've already gone over.